everyone. Welcome to our 7th edition of CD Live. My name is Larry Hansen. I'm Chief Marketing Officer for Conference Direct, and I'm joined by my partner on hosting today, Adam Briggs, who's our Senior Vice President of Operations. And we have a special guest today, Dharmesh Dayabhai, who is the founder of Streampoint Solutions in Resiada, and he is one of our partners for virtual and hybrid solutions. So our topic today is really talking about some best practices for hybrid events. And Dharmesh, with his experience and company, has some great feedback. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Adam.
Excellent. Thanks, Larry. And Dharmesh, we've done a lot of work together on the virtual in-person side. So we really appreciate you taking some time today to go through this with us. So I think, we could kind of start at the beginning. And really the first step for the planners and viewers of this podcast is really talking about, the venue in terms of, obviously with virtual, it's technology, in person, the venue, and they need to both coexist for hybrid. So what are some of the areas that you encourage your customers to look at when deciding that they want to execute a hybrid meeting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before the pandemic, the number one thing that has always been top of list has always been internet bandwidth. So post-pandemic, I think that's even going to be a bigger thing to think about, which is bandwidth. So that's definitely going to be important, because if we want to stream from on-site to online, then there has to be some huge considerations in the amount of bandwidth that's going to be pushed. So that's definitely going to be something that's important to consider, and also how many sessions that you're going to be streaming at the same time live. And there are different strategies that we do recommend on what needs to go live versus what could be recorded and done as a virtual pass, for example. So we've seen some events do that really well. And in the consideration of what events need to be streamed live, keynotes, definitely a great one to do. Spotlight speakers, definitely a great one to do. But then breakouts, do you really need that live? Probably not. But what you could probably do is have it timed. So on-site, you're doing your breakout session. Online, you're doing your breakout. But then everybody online connects to one room, like a Q&A room that's connected to the on-site, the in-person. And that could be a great way to collab the online and on-site together. For sure.
So going back to the bandwidth question, are there any kind of benchmarks that you look to for actual bandwidth? So when they're negotiating, I mean, I've heard numbers anywhere from 5 megabytes a second to 30 megabytes a second. Is there any hard and fast rules for what they should get?
That's an excellent question. So when you're looking at video quality is really dependent on bitrate. Bitrate is how much pixels you're getting in a screen, essentially. And essentially get more crisper pixelation in your screen, you need more bandwidth to do that. So ideally, if you're pushing anywhere from, let's say, 2 to 5 megabits per second, you're going to be hitting at probably 720p, essentially. If you want to go HD, you do want to shoot for 10 or more. Now consider if you have 5 sessions pushing at 10 or more, so then you probably need a 50 megabit line at the minimum, because you're going 10 each. So that's kind of what you want to think about when you're streaming out live, is the quality that you want to stream at and how many concurrents you're going to be doing as well.
Yeah, and at the quality really quickly, Larry, also factor in your audience. So even if you have a camera that can record 8K, you probably aren't going to have too many attendees that are going to receive 8K, so that might be overkill.
Yeah, exactly. And right now a big thing is like, oh, let's go 4K and or 2K, but realistically 1080p is a fantastic resolution as a benchmark. Anything more than that, then you're hitting more cinema or YouTube style videos that are really crisp and clear, which I think it's a great benchmark to hit if you're doing a keynote speaker that's maybe pre-recorded and then posted online with full editing. But for live streaming, 1080 tops is perfectly crystal for everyone to not notice any deviations.
Yeah, and one other footnote on that is also that's dedicated, right? So that's the internet just for production, not for attendees or other uses.
Yeah, exactly. exactly. Because if you start sharing that, you're going to have dips in your internet, your resolution's going to go bad, and you can't control that. Then it becomes funny.
Dharmesh, obviously for those of us who've been doing virtual events for the past year, we know one of the biggest challenges is the dropping of the internet. When you're on property, what would you say is the best redundancy plan for that?
Yeah, so it happens more than where internet does drop. And the biggest thing to do is, as you say, have a plan. The best thing that you can do is have a really robust MiFi spot that if it's going to drop, this is what your plan involves, where you're going to plug into your MiFi and then start streaming it through. And MiFi, you do need a strong MiFi. You can't deal with a simple low-grade MiFi in that scenario. You do want to be prepared with a solid backup plan. Now, in a venue, if you're shooting from the basement and you're trying to stream out, you may definitely have some limitations on that. So that's just stuff to consider, the location where you're streaming from as well, to invoke your backup as well.
Have you seen any customers actually pre-record a session as backup just in case they have internet issues at the venue?
Yeah, we actually do that quite a bit. So it does involve a little bit more work, but for keynotes that are potentially going live and the time permits it, those keynotes can be pre-recorded. So in case the live element of the Q&A cannot, let's say your Q&A portion is important for that session, but if you're to do it with a pre-record, you still save the program minus the Q&A essentially. And it's a smarter way to do it if budgeting and timing does allow it, for sure.
Great.
For sure. Yeah.
That's actually a good segue, Larry. I know we were talking earlier. You had mentioned, budget's going to be a big piece to this. Dharmesh, are there any best practices for saving money?
Yes, there is quite a bit.
This is when everyone wants to hear, Dharmesh, so make it good.
I know. Well, everybody wants bells and whistles too. So I think there's a happy medium in that scenario. So I believe when you're doing program development, when we're hearing hybrid, hybrid necessarily doesn't mean live streaming from in-person to online and vice versa. What it does mean, I believe, that hybrid has the option to allow in-person meetings happening with the similar content and experience as a online experience. Now, the tie-in of that would definitely be branding to make sure it's cohesive from start to finish. But when it comes to budgeting, definitely internet's going to spike up and whatnot. But what we've done with some of our other clients is create a virtual path, so a virtual package. So this is how this works. You start your event with in-person, where you do stream maybe your keynotes live. And then there's a pass that people can buy as the virtual pass that happens after the session has completed to have virtual access. So that's a virtual access only pass, where all the content there is now in a virtual scenario. There are cases where people who go in person may also want to buy an add-on to a virtual pass because maybe they missed some sessions that they wanted to see. This happens to me all the time. So I'm very happy to buy a virtual pass, for example, in addition to, because I can go back and reconnect with the content that I missed later, or just rejig what I thought I heard in the existing session as well. So that's actually more additional revenue that you may not have anticipated before, reducing your streaming cost by having it pre-recorded, but you have to have a plan to have that content immediately posted on video on demand, and then you're good to go. So instead of 3 days, you launch it for 5 days, 2 days virtual pass, 3 days in person.
So Dharmesh, if you had to say the average cost for pre-record is blank, how much more would it be to do it in person? I know we're talking cost savings in equipment, but if you had to say it's double the cost to do it in person as compared to pre-record, to get them an idea.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to AV involvement. What's been interesting with virtual, it has eliminated that big AV cost that's usually associated with events. In this scenario now, you would actually have your AV cost in addition to your virtual production cost as well. So there will be an increase of cost. However, I believe with the addition of the virtual pass, where you are generating additional revenue now, can help offset some of that cost as well. And I think it's just all about seeing where you're going to put that dollar. If you're going to have a lot of sessions live, I don't recommend it. I totally recommend pre-record sessions, and also having recorded sessions being posted live after, for sure.
And any way to save money? I mean, obviously, general session, you're going to have a lot of the equipment in the room already. You may have to add a few things, but when you get into the breakouts and streaming some of that, what would you say is some best practices to save doing it live and not spending as much money as you are on something like a general session?
The silliest and craziest way to do it is Zoom, to be honest. So you can literally have a camera there with an internet connection, throw it to Zoom. All your online attendees are in a Zoom room. They're collaborating that way, and then that's being projected back onto your screen in person. So then that's giving you that whole live collaboration look and feel, essentially. But then you still have to have a pretty good internet connection in there as well.
Yep.
And one tip for Zoom is you can actually request Zoom to have an upgraded account if you have a business and enterprise plan at a 1080p resolution. So you do have better quality that's being posted out there.
You know, and we talk about the breakouts, and obviously creating that engagement between the virtual attendees and the in-person is really critical. So it seems somewhat seamless. What are some how do you approach creating that engagement between those two entities?
Yeah, I think that's everyone's trying to do that one for sure. And one way I can see people are going to do is through chat, but then really thinking about, like, I think people will want it, but people are not going to use it. Because if we're going to be in person, I'm going to be talking to you in person. I'm not going to be on my phone chatting with people who are online. It just doesn't work. But what will work is that scenario where if I'm in a session room and then I see attendees in front of me who are online and we're having that extended look and feel, that extended connection, in one room, that I think definitely nets a better connection for sure. For sure.
What's your feeling that, you know, and this, we used this one time and it was so, but the owl, like in breakouts and using that to create that interaction, you know, that's that one tool that kind of pans around, but I'm kind of a little torn on how beneficial it is, but what's your feedback on using something like the owl?
I've used it too. I think owl is great for a boardroom, but if you're going to use it for a session room, it would just constantly be swapping to follow the voice activation, and that would probably make people go really dizzy, to be honest.
Yeah,
for sure.
I agree.
Yeah, size of room definitely matters there. Going back to the engagement piece, I think one area that your tool with the chat capability, I think, really helps with hybrid, especially in this kind of back to normal period, is in a health and safety perspective. So to your point, if you did have both the in-person attendees as well as the virtual attendees using the same chat, you wouldn't have to have 30 people walk up to a microphone for Q&A.
Yeah.
You could have everyone engaging, you know, with the chat to submit questions to a moderator, for example, and they could all review that on their phone. So what are some of the things what's Streampoint's approach to that kind of shared engagement?
Yeah, we're exploring similar kind of notions that way. Ideally for us, because we focus more on the registration side of things on the virtual platform, for the chat, what we would do is just work with chat partners that have the mobile app. Because if the mobile app is there, it should just be in one application anyways. I don't see users downloading 2 or 3 apps. I think that would be app overload, so to speak. So having that one app and making sure that engagement is in there. And what would be great is if that chat function in the app can be as a widget into the virtual platform, going the other way. So then that way the virtual users can chat through the app that way. So you have one app for chatting. You don't have 2. And that's
Sure.
very
that makes
important.
sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. So a big part of engagement, and I think most of the industry would say that this was initially anyway, the area that didn't translate as well to virtual is exhibits and sponsorship piece of it. I think a lot of exhibitors and sponsors jumped in, and I think planners tried to structure it with the best intentions. But if you look at, the first round of virtual meetings, the surveys, education scored high, networking scored pretty high, but the exhibits was a little bit weaker. I think it's gotten better, and definitely, I know you've told me you've had some events with virtual where the exhibits were a resounding success. What did you do, or what do you think is important for virtual first and then going into hybrid for an effective exhibit hall?
Yeah, we've been noodling on this quite a bit too. So in the virtual space, I think everybody ran into it first. Boom, let's go, let's get something out there, make people talk. The issue is that nobody really thought about how people navigate in an online website, for example, and what they would essentially go to. Just knowing our browsing behavior, whatever's in front of us is what we're going to focus on. For us to go 2 or 3 levels deep, it's kind of tough, right? So then how do you bring that exhibitor booth to the forefront of that page? That's number one. So once we started addressing that and talking to clients about having exhibitor sessions as part of the agenda, having advertisements that link directly into the booth, for example, having sessions that are sponsored and tied into that ad. So that created that notion to increase exhibitor viewership in that scenario. But then for in-person now, connecting to a virtual space, this is where it's going to be interesting, where you could have a booth, for example, where, for example, in our software, there is a virtual video booth that we have where people can be on camera virtually. So on site, if someone actually put a camera in their booth, their physical booth, and a screen, they could actually talk to someone who's remotely somewhere else and have that interactive exhibitor booth like that. And I think that's much better than having text chatting, because now you're actually remotely speaking to someone visually in real time in 2 different booths, a virtual booth and also an in-person booth as well.
Great upgrade option for planners as well.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Dharmesh, one of the benefits of virtual trade shows, you get really good metrics.
Yeah.
So, how, when you're doing in-person and virtual, as an ex-meeting planner, the thought of having to get your ROI via the trade show scanner and one, it's like 2 different trade shows and then marrying it together. Is there some way to integrate those and put it all in one so you're not having to do really 2 separate ROI tracks?
Yeah, absolutely. So number one way to do it is making sure that there's a single point, a single software or a single source of data where everything's kind of getting together. And then also with that, there's cost involved. So to track so virtually it's easy because you're tracking who's in your virtual space. Very simple. If you were to take that into a real life in-person scenario, then you're talking about beacons and RFID. And before COVID, I still remember when we're putting out prices for RFID and beacons, it's always a hot button about cost, but that is how you 1-for-1 on a tracking metric, do it in person to virtual, is beacons and RFID to browsing data together.
Okay, great.
Excellent. One other, what do you see as the future of hybrid, Dharmesh? Do you see this as a bridge to getting back to in-person meetings? Do you think that there's going to be an ongoing market for hybrid meetings for virtual, or are some events going to go away and just be virtual? What do you see, if you're putting your crystal ball in front of you, or your magic 8 ball, what do you see as the future for hybrid and virtual meetings?
That's a big one. From what I'm seeing, where are we right now? March. So January to March right now. What's exciting is we are talking about a lot of in-person meetings, which is wild. We've actually done some, which is even crazier. And with hybrid, the only way I'm seeing hybrid happening right now is where people are pre-recording content for online or recording on-site and putting that online. Everyone is excited about streaming in person to live virtual, but I don't think it's going to happen. It's going to be a very small percentage of people who are going to have a true hybrid real-time experience versus having it shifted in person and online to having pre-recorded content. That's, I think, where the trend is going to go, because people are really anxious to meet, and that's the first thing that they're going to do is, yep, hybrid will be here for a year and a half, virtual, and then I can see it tapering down.
But you think it is going to expand the use of live streaming broadcasts. So
yeah,
really the takeaway from that for me is there's a place for hybrid, there's a place for virtual, but there's not going to be a widespread market for totally recreating your in-person meeting online. It's going to be cherry picking the parts that work well and using it as a way to extend the event versus recreating the event.
Yeah, because like even from an event manager standpoint, you're literally looking at doing 2 events simultaneously at the same time. And that is also a huge uptake in resources and execution. So you kind of have to pick the best of both worlds. At the end of the day, the dollars and cents that you're going to put into your event will also determine how real-time you want that experience to be. Real-time hybrid experience, let's call it that,
No, that's great, Dharmesh. Thank you. Larry, any other questions for you?
I'm good. Thank you, Dharmesh. You've been great. We really appreciate this.
Yeah,
No
wonderful.
Lots of knowledge in this head. Yeah.
Well, Larry, thanks as always. And Dharmesh, we really appreciate your time joining us. Some great insight. And I know that it's been a roller coaster ride the last year, but the joke that I've been sharing is, we can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train coming at us.
Let's knock on wood for that one.
That's right. Wonderful. Well, thank you all very much, and thanks to those watching from home. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Great.
Thank you.